What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today I'm particularly excited, if you can't tell. That's because I get to do a full-on competitive deck for the first time in a while. We've been pretty, devoted to the budget around here lately, but today I'm going to treat myself and some of you by just playing all the best cards in the format, and I get to play my favorite 3-color combination while we're at it, so that's cool. Here's Grixis Midrange, y'all. Well, first things first, if we're going to play the most powerful cards in the format, we might as well just go ahead and play maybe the most powerful card in Standard, and that's the Scarab God, which we're going to play 2 copies of. Well, Beatlemania has definitely infested Standard at this point. You're either playing with the Scarab God or you're playing cards to answer the Scarab God. I can't tell you how many times. Just in the past month, I've shown you Cast Out or Ixalan's Binding or a bunch of other cards have been like, this is good against the Scarab God. That's why we're playing it. But sometimes it's better to join them than to beat them. And that's what we're doing here. And it feels pretty good. All of our creatures are insane to reanimate with the Scarab God. Plus, we've got a butt ton of removal in this deck. So we can just kill their dudes and then just grab them out of their graveyard with Scarab God. That feels pretty awesome too. It's just if it's not the best card in Standard, it's definitely the best long game card in Standard, and there's so many tricks with it, and just reanimating stuff isn't even the end of it. If we've reanimated one creature that we've managed to keep around, and we get a scry every turn, we get a drain, that's pretty cool. The Scarab God is insane, and it's very, very hard to remove. It's a card you force them to answer, and there's really not that many answers to it. So, with that said, it's probably the best card in Standard. If we're making a deck that consists of the best cards in Standard, we have to put it in. We're also going to make room way up there on the curve at 5 mana for 4 whole copies of Glorybringer. And I know, it looks like a lot of 5-drops, but we got plenty of stuff to protect us on the lower end. We'll get there, we'll talk about it, but for now, Glorybringer's insane in most matchups. Against aggro, he'll come down and blow a dude away and just create instant card advantage for you and still be a huge flying guy. That's nice. Against mid-range and energy decks and stuff, he's just got a million targets except for other Glorybringers, but you can blow anything else away with Glorybringer, and if you resolve him against control, he might not have too much to hit, but he's still a really big haste flyer that puts a really fast clock on them, so he's just good in nearly every match, and you'd be surprised how much, how often a big dumb flyer will just win you the game in this format. Now, as we move through the creatures, I'll sort of briefly discuss their Scarab God ability, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. And Glorybringer is a really good target for a Scarab God, It's basically getting a 1-mana discount on your 4/4 flyer with haste that can just kill guys. That's crazy. If you've just got a Scarab God out and a Glorybringer in your graveyard, just that combination of cards represents an enormous threat to your opponent. Moving down the curve a little, we got some kidnapping to do. We're going to play 4 copies of Hostagetaker in the deck because, by and large, at the end of the day, I think this might be my favorite card in Standard right now. I talked about how Glorybringer can just sort of make card advantage for you by killing a guy the turn it comes down and leaves you with a creature. They're down a card, you're up a card, and it's huge. That's card advantage. Hostagetaker does that too, but sometimes better. It'll come down a turn earlier than Glorybringer. Take one of their dudes, so they're already down a card, you're up a card. And sometimes you can play their dudes. You're up 2 cards, they're down a card. That's crazy card advantage on a body. And you want to talk about a card that's good with the Scarab God? Hostagetaker, you guys. There's a couple of ways that Hostagetaker is kind of broken with Scarab God. Obviously, when you get down Taker, they're going to prioritize killing it. They're going to Lightning Strike it, Harness Lightning, whatever. Revolt to Fatal Push. And they can get their guy back. But you just drop Scarab God, suddenly you threaten being able to get back Hostagetaker even bigger than it was before and still take one of their creatures. Maybe a better one this time, It's just just that is freaking outrageous. But there's even times with Hostagetaker where you'll take their guy, actually get to play it. At that point, they kind of have to play removal against their own creature, if they want to not die to it. So they're spending a piece of removal on one of their own cards. They're already in a bad position, but you can actually just Scarab God their own creature back out of their graveyard. You can steal it back if they manage to remove it. That's just insane too. So just I love Hostagetaker in this deck with the Scarab God. It's just kind of dumb. It shouldn't exist. But it does, so we're taking advantage of it. That's basically the credo of every spike, A little bit lower on the curve, though. We're going to play 3 copies of Champion of Wits to start off the 3-drops here. Now, Glorybringer and Hostagetaker can make sort of virtual card advantage for you, but this makes, actual real card advantage once you eternalize it or get it back with the Scarab God. This is another thing that's pretty crazy to reanimate with the Scarab God. Draw 4 is nuts. And you get a 3-mana discount on eternalization, essentially. But even if you don't have a Scarab God, you can sometimes eternalize it late in the game, get your 4 cards, have your 4/4 dude. It's pretty crazy, and yeah, you got to discard a little, but we don't care. We're playing the Scarab God, so we can always discard creatures and then Scarab God them into play later. It's just a really good way to filter for cards in the early game, put a chump blocker on the battlefield, or sometimes a creature that can get through for 4 or 6 damage before all is said and done, you know? While they're trying to prioritize other threats, sometimes you can get through with a champion. So, you know, that's definitely something to consider too. But for the most part, it's just something that helps us filter, chump blocks for us, and then comes back later in the game to actually make real card advantage and be a huge guy. Now, we're going to play 3 copies of Werlla Virtuoso here in the 3-drop slot, too. We're not doing a bunch with energy in the deck, but there are some energy elements, you know. We're definitely not as devoted to it as a lot of the energy decks in the format, but we're still going to play some energy, mostly because we want Ether Hub to work in the mana base. But while we're playing energy, we might as well play Werlla Virtuoso because it is maybe, possibly the best 3-drop in Standard. The reason I say that is because it is definitely the most likely to get out of control if left unchecked. I mean, even if it's not left unchecked, it's pretty good. You know what I mean? Like, it put 2 power on the battlefield with 3 toughness that blocks really, really well, and it put at least 1 flying power in the air, unless you use that energy for something else, which is yet another thing the card is good for, you know? You can use that energy for Ether Hub or a couple of other of the cards that require energy. It's just a really versatile piece that'll either, like, give you extra energy to do stuff with and chump block, or sometimes make, like, 2 or even 3 Thopters for you in a game, which can be really, really valuable. To finish off the creatures, way down here at 2 on the curve, we're going to play 4 copies of Glint Sleeve Siphoner, a ridiculous creature. You know, this is something else that can create actual card advantage, especially if left unchecked. We can draw 2, 3, or more cards off of a Glint Sleeve Siphoner in a game, and that's just crazy, especially if we get it down early enough to really do some damage. Even if you're not drawing cards off of it, it provides energy for Ether Hub or Werlla Virtuoso or Harness Lightning. You know, it can also do a lot with energy. That's one of the reasons energy is so good, is because it just does so much depending on what you need it to do for any given situation. You know, a lot of people bemoan energy decks. But even though this isn't a straight up energy deck, there's definitely, obviously, energy elements to it. But that's because energy is so versatile. You can use this energy to draw cards, fix your mana, deal more damage with Harness Lightning, get more creatures with Werlla Virtuoso. There's a reason energy is so good right now. And before I move on, actually, from the creatures, these, like, little guys on the lower end of the curve, your Glint Sleeves, your Werlla Virtuosos and stuff, they demand answers. If they don't answer Glint Sleeve, it's going to draw a bunch of cards for you. If they don't answer Werlla Virtuoso, it's going to make a bunch of creatures. So you're forcing your opponent to answer even your small guys, which draws removal out of their hand. So by the time you get to your Hostagetaker, that's really important, or your Scarab God, they just don't have the removal to deal with those cards anymore because they spent them on these little dudes that they are still forced to answer. Now, we're playing 2 Planeswalkers in this deck, and they're both named Chandra. As a matter of fact, they're the same Chandra. We're playing Chandra Torch of Defiance in the deck because she does all the things. You know, I've already talked about the versatility of this deck, and Chandra's yet another ridiculously versatile element that just does whatever you need, you know. Sometimes she's card advantage, sometimes she blasts a dude in the face, you know, sometimes she ramps you, and her ultimate is gettable in some matches, you know, and her ultimate is often lights out if you get a couple of turns with it. So, just Chandra's crazy. We will want the ramp sometimes. She's another removal piece. Note all the removal. There's like, I think it's 22 different pieces of removal in this deck. They ain't getting nothing past us, and Chandra's part of that too. And sometimes the card advantage is really, really necessary. So just, Chandra's the best Planeswalker in the format, and while we're playing the best cards, we're going to play 2 Chandras. Now, the rest of the deck is literally all removal. You know, I just mentioned we're playing over 20 plus removal pieces in the deck, but outside of Hostagetaker, Glorybringer, you haven't really seen that many of them. Most of them have been on sticks, so like Chandra and such. Let's talk about these actual spells here. We're going to play 4 copies of Fatal Push to start things off. Now, Fatal Push is an absolute necessity to make sure we don't just, like, fold to aggro game 1, you know. Again, we've got a bunch of removal. We can definitely beat Ramanap Red somewhat easily in some games. Depends on our start and their start. But Fatal Push just really, really helps the win percentage in that matchup. It kills nearly everything that they play outside of Hazoret. So we'll play that. It also has the added advantage of killing, like, Long Tusk Cubs and stuff, which is equally important. We're also going to play 4 copies of Harness Lightning here. This can sometimes kill really big stuff, you know. With the damage, with the energy from a Werlla Virtuoso, let's say we don't use it, you know, we can kill stuff with 6 toughness. A Torrential Gearhulk sometimes, if we need to. Just Harness Lightning can sometimes kill things that are like 1 or 2 toughness and leave you in energy, or you can just pool all of your energy and use it to kill like a 5 or 6 toughness guy. So, Harness Lightning's crazy. It's only 2 mana, add instant speed, and Sometimes it's just 2 mana to like make a token with Werlla Virtuoso. Like it's extremely versatile in that way too. Sometimes you just pay 2 for a Harness Lightning, and that gives you more energy to draw cards with Glint Sleeve. You know, you get a card off Glint Sleeve and a mana for your Ether Hub for your 2 mana. That can be worth it too. But we're going to play some 2 of removal to finish the main deck off here, starting with the 2 copies of Doomfall, which originally was 2 copies of Abrade, but it earned its slots, man. I just kept bringing it in from the board way too often, like to ignore it. So in the end, switch those things. You know, Abrade went to the board, this came into the main deck, because it does so much in so many matchups. You get it game 1 against Ramanap Red, you can easily put them in a situation where they have to sack their Hazoret. Against energy decks, Bristling Hydra is a really effective card against us, and this is a pretty decent answer, provided that they haven't like virtuosoed in a bunch of Thopters. This can be a really good answer to Bristling Hydra. Against control, you can make them sack their Torrential Gearhulk or just get that approach out of their hand and exile it. That's pretty good. Against like combo decks, you can exile their GPG, their Godfarer's Gift, or their Refurbish or whatever. There's just a million things that Doomfall can do, and it's really much better than I initially gave it credit for. Again, it earned its slots. And we'll finish things off with 2 copies of Vraska's Contempt. We're not only going to play the Scarab God, but we're going to answer the Scarab God with Vraska's Contempt and a lot of other creatures, you know, Hazoret and stuff. There's any indestructible gods of any name, you know. This just answers pretty darn near everything right now in this format, so except for like, I don't know, Carnage Tyrant. There's a couple of things. You know, Bristling Hydra sometimes. But Vraska's Contempt is just insane in the Ramanap Red match. You know, it kills their Hazoret and gets us back up on life total. So just in that one matchup, it's great. But even in other matchups, it's got plenty of great targets. Here's our mana base right here. We're playing 26 lands. Seems like an awful lot, but we got a lot high up on the curve, and there's cards on the board that are even higher up on the curve, so we need to hit all of our land drops whenever possible, especially in the sort of early and mid game. We have got to hit those drops, you guys. So, you know, we're trying to play really good stuff on curve. So if we miss a land drop, we're in trouble. So we're going to play a bunch of lands for a lot of reasons. And it was really tough to get this mana base right, but I think we finally nailed it here. I do want to point out the bicycle lands. These are awesome in the late game. You know, if you draw a land dead, you can just blast right through your deck, cycle that land, and draw something else that's likely to be a stupid bomb. You know, we've got a pretty high concentration of stupid bombs. So sometimes when you draw dead late, it is great to be able to just filter that land and draw something ridiculous. And here's the board right here. This also took a while to get right, but I'm pretty happy with the final result here. Against aggro decks, we've already got a ton of main deck removal, but we can bring in some number of Abrades and definitely the 2 Gifted Aetherborns in that matchup, if no other. Gifted Aetherborn is very effective in that match. Against energy, we've got a lot of silver bullets. Gonti's great in that matchup. Vizier is insane in that matchup and can sometimes make the main deck in these Grixis lists. Vizier is just so crazy because it already copies all of our creatures very well, but against energy, it copies all of their guys very well, and they can't stop you from copying their Bristling Hydra. Remember that, too. Locust God is also nuts against midrange, so remember that. And Nicol Bolas is crazy in the energy matchup, too, and he's got to be in the deck. This is Grixis, and if I don't include him, he'll come for me, so he's in there. Now, against a smattering of other decks in the format that we're not quite as likely to see, but we're still somewhat likely to see, we've got Duress and Negate. We stretch these pretty well. Duress and Negate are both good in the control matchup. They're good against combo decks like Godfarer's Gift, and they're good against tokens where, you know, you can use Duress to get the Anointed Procession out of their hand, or you can just counter it when they go to play it with a Negate. So there's really, really good cards right now in a bunch of different matchups that you're not super likely to see, but you will occasionally run into. We also stretch Abrade pretty well. I've already told you Abrade comes in against aggro, but it can also come in against Godfarer's Gift, and for that matter, even pummeler decks. You know, you'll come up against energy decks that like to play pummeler and get in really fast with it. Abrade's also good for that matchup. And finally, there's River's Rebuke. This is essentially our board wipe that keeps our, you know, Werlla Virtuoso tokens from dying, keeps our Hostagetaker from, you know, giving you your creature back. You know, it's a one-sided wrath. And that's really good for specifically this deck, especially, again, against tokens, but also against energy decks. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 69 points. That is the highest score that I've covered in quite some time. Again, mostly because I've been doing budget decks lately. But even as far as competitive decks go, that is a really, really high score, you guys. And again, that's just because it plays the best cards. You know, look at that power score, 9. That's because we're just playing the best cards in Standard right now, unapologetically, and they kind of work well together. Actually, if there were just like one general strategy tip to offer, one Zen soundbite, you know, and this is true of all decks and especially mid-range decks, but just know when to play defense and when to play offense. You know, as far as offense goes, again, we're just playing the best cards in the format. So if we're at parity with them on the board, almost anything we play forces them to answer it or have a bad time. But in other instances, especially against aggro decks, there's going to be times where you want to hold back for a couple of turns, play removal, keep the board relatively clean, play a threat of or two of your own, maybe bait removal out of their hand, and then when they're exhausted on resources, that's when you put the pedal down and you play your Glorybringers and your Scarab Gods and stuff, turn the corner on them, start reanimating stuff that you killed earlier in the game, and just really flush them out because there's nothing they can do about it once they're exhausted on resources. But this is where the bad news comes in, and I've made no bones about the fact that this deck is straight up competitive, no regards to budget. I've shown you expensive cards all video, but it still kind of sucks to have to tell you this is a $400 deck. Even on TCG Player, which is the cheapest website you can buy the deck on, it's still $400. And that's an awful lot. But, you know, just remember that any, high tier deck that you're buying right now is going to be around 400, so it competes with them. And not even that long ago, we were playing decks with 4 baby Jaces and a bunch of fetch lands and 4 different colors, and they were like $1,000, you know. So I'm not telling you that $400 is cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but that price is at least competitive with other really high tier decks, and it's nowhere near as bad as it was like a year and a half ago. So I've already name dropped them, but I might as well do it again. If you want to see this whole deck list in one place, rather than listening to my dumb fat mouth ramble for another 15 minutes or however long this video was. It feels like a long one. But anyway, if you want to see this whole deck in one place, click the very first link in the description box, as always. That'll take you over to my Spansa TCG Player. They help bring you content from me. These are nice people, you guys. So click the first link in the description. Check out the deck from there. But anyway, pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. If you enjoyed the content, like the content, I do a lot of work for you guys, and likes make me feel really happy. You could also sub if you're new or if you haven't done that yet. Still got a bunch of decks coming up, plus Rivals of Ixalan spoilers, Christmas special thing. There's things that we're doing, so make sure you sub so you see all that stuff. And that's more or less it. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or throw me a whole $1 of your money every month on Patreon to keep the deck techs coming. And if you throw me that $1, you can see what decks we're doing the day before they come out. That's crazy, bruh. So do all that stuff, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love. Be kind.